The world changed, not with a war, not with a collapse, but with a decision made in a desert. In October 1973, a handful of oil ministers gathered in secret, and within days, the global economy trembled. Gas stations from New York to Paris ran dry. Stock markets crashed. And the same countries that had once been dismissed as desert kingdoms suddenly held the world's wealth in their hands. It was the first time in modern history that energy, not gold, not armies, dictated global power. But how did we get there? How did a few barrels of oil become more valuable than entire empires? And why did this event permanently reshape the balance of wealth between East and West? This was not just an energy crisis. It was a shift in civilization, a moment when the world realized that its growth, prosperity, and even survival depended on a single resource buried beneath the sands of the Middle East. The 1973 oil crisis was not born overnight. It was the product of decades of hidden deals, Cold War rivalries, and a growing resentment from nations tired of being suppliers to powers that treated them like colonies. When the embargo hit, it wasn't just oil that stopped flowing, it was the illusion of Western control. By the end of that decade, the rules of global wealth had been rewritten. Petrodollars replaced gold, oil replaced silver, and the modern financial system, as we know it, was reborn under the shadow of scarcity. This is the story of how energy became the new empire, and how one crisis changed the course of global power forever. In the decades following World War II, the world was rebuilt on oil. The same tanks, planes, and ships that had fueled global conflict now powered a new dream, an age of consumption. America led the way. Its highways stretched endlessly across the continent, its cities blazed with neon light, and its factories never slept. Europe followed, rising from the ashes of war with the help of American dollars and Middle Eastern oil. By the 1950s, oil had become the blood of the modern economy. It powered industries, transportation, electricity, even agriculture. Every product, every service, every dream of progress relied on it. But while the West built its wealth, the East held the well. Nations like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, and Iran supplied the crude that kept the world alive, yet received only a fraction of its value. The oil companies, known as the Seven Sisters, Exxon, Shell, BP, and others, controlled prices, profits, and production, leaving producer nations dependent and resentful. As the Cold War divided the planet between East and West, another silent division emerged, between those who consumed energy and those who provided it. The balance of power seemed eternal, until a group of producers decided it was time to change the rules. In 1960, 5 nations decided they had had enough. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and Venezuela met in Baghdad to form the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC. Their goal was simple but revolutionary: to reclaim control over their own resources and to speak with one voice against the oil giants that had dictated prices for decades. At first, the world paid little attention. Western powers saw OPEC as a symbolic alliance, a political gesture without real strength. But in the shadows, the oil producers were learning. They studied markets, measured consumption, and realized one undeniable truth: without their oil, the modern world could not function. Meanwhile, global demand for oil exploded. By the late 1960s, cars, airplanes, and industries multiplied faster than ever. Consumption doubled in just a decade. The U.S., once the largest producer, became a net importer of oil for the first time. Its energy independence was gone, replaced by dependence on foreign suppliers it barely understood. And then came 1973. When the Middle East once again became the stage of war, the Yom Kippur War, the OPEC nations saw their moment. They would no longer sell oil to those who supported Israel. What began as a political statement would soon become the greatest economic shock since the Great Depression. The age of cheap oil was over, and a new world order was about to begin. October 1973. The Middle East was once again at war. Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel during Yom Kippur, the holiest day in Judaism. As tanks clashed in the Sinai and jets roared over the Golan Heights, another battle began, one not fought with weapons, but with oil. The Arab members of OPEC, led by Saudi Arabia's King Faisal and Egypt's Anwar Sadat, decided to strike at the heart of the West's power, its energy supply. They announced an oil embargo against the United States and any nation supporting Israel. Almost overnight, the flow of oil slowed to a trickle. Tankers stopped sailing. Prices soared. Within a few weeks, the price of a barrel of oil quadrupled, from $3 to $12. For a world built on cheap energy, it was a shock of unimaginable magnitude. In the United States, drivers waited for hours in endless lines at gas stations, only to find the pumps empty. "Sorry, no gas today," became a national slogan of despair. In Europe and Japan, the situation was even worse. Factories closed, flights were cancelled, lights dimmed in city centers to save power. Governments began rationing fuel, while inflation spiraled out of control. The Western world, which for decades had controlled the global economy, now found itself at the mercy of a new power, the oil-producing nations. For the first time, the wealth of the world was flowing from Washington and London to Riyadh and Tehran. But this was just the beginning. Because behind the chaos of empty gas stations, a deeper transformation was already taking place, one that would redefine money, finance, and global power for generations. As the world gasped for oil, the balance of power shifted overnight. The nations once labeled as underdeveloped now possessed the most coveted resource on Earth, and they knew it. By early 1974, oil revenues in the Middle East exploded. Saudi Arabia's income multiplied tenfold in just 1 year. The desert kingdoms began building skyscrapers, airports, and cities that rose from the sand like mirages turned real. Meanwhile, the Western world faced its worst economic crisis since the 1930s. Inflation soared, unemployment climbed, and stock markets collapsed. Economists coined a new word, stagflation, to describe the impossible combination of stagnant growth and rising prices. But while others panicked, Washington adapted. President Richard Nixon, who had just taken the United States off the gold standard 2 years earlier, saw a new opportunity. If the dollar was no longer backed by gold, it needed another foundation, something equally universal and valuable. That something would be oil. In 1974, the U.S. reached a secret agreement with Saudi Arabia. In exchange for American military protection and weapons, the Saudis agreed to sell oil exclusively in U.S. dollars and to reinvest their profits in American banks and bonds. It was a masterstroke. Every country in the world now needed dollars to buy oil, and those dollars flowed back into the U.S. financial system. Thus was born the petrodollar system, a silent, elegant mechanism that restored American financial dominance without a single shot fired. The oil crisis had humbled the West, but it also gave birth to a new empire, one built not on territory, but on monetary control. Yet even this new order carried within it the seeds of future instability, as nations realized that whoever controlled energy could control the world. By 1975, the shockwaves of the oil crisis had reached every corner of the planet. What had started as a political act had become an economic earthquake that redrew the global map of power. Western nations plunged into recession. Factories that once ran 24 hours a day now stood silent. Inflation devoured savings. And ordinary citizens, from Detroit to London, discovered that energy scarcity could bring modern life to a standstill. Governments scrambled to react. In the United States, a new phrase entered the national vocabulary: energy independence. The country lowered speed limits, created the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and began exploring domestic oil fields in Alaska and the Gulf of Mexico. In Europe and Japan, the response was different. They turned to efficiency and innovation, developing smaller cars, public transport, and eventually investing in nuclear and renewable energy. The era of endless consumption was over. A new mindset of conservation had begun. Meanwhile, oil-producing nations experienced a golden age. The petrodollar revenues funded modern infrastructure, education, and technological ambitions. Cities like Riyadh, Dubai, and Kuwait City became symbols of sudden wealth and of the fragile dependence that came with it. But not all that glittered was gold. The flood of money created corruption, inequality, and new geopolitical rivalries. The oil boom of the 1970s also financed wars, revolutions, and the rise of movements that would haunt the following decades. By the end of the decade, the world had changed forever. Energy was no longer just a commodity, it was a weapon, a currency, and a tool of diplomacy. The 1973 crisis had revealed a simple truth: whoever controlled the flow of oil controlled the future of civilization. Half a century later, the lessons of 1973 echo louder than ever. The world may have changed, technology has advanced, economies have globalized, yet the same fragile dependence remains. Today, energy once again defines the balance of power. Oil still fuels transportation, industries, and armies. Natural gas heats homes and drives economies. And once more, geopolitics and energy have become inseparable. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, Europe faced a chilling reminder of 1973. Gas pipelines were cut, prices skyrocketed, and governments scrambled to secure alternative supplies. The continent that once relied on Middle Eastern oil now found itself dependent on Russian gas, and history repeated itself: scarcity, inflation, and panic. At the same time, new energy superpowers are emerging. China dominates the production of solar panels, batteries, and rare earth minerals, the lifeblood of the Green Revolution. The Middle East, once again, sits at the crossroads, investing billions to diversify before the oil era fades. But the paradox remains: every transition creates a new dependency. The world's shift toward renewable energy may reduce carbon emissions, but it also concentrates control over lithium, cobalt, and technology in the hands of a few nations. The crisis of 1973 was not just about oil, it was about control, scarcity, and adaptation. And those same forces are shaping the 21st century. Only now, the battlefield is digital, financial, and environmental. History doesn't repeat itself, it evolves. The question is not whether we'll face another energy crisis, but whether we've learned enough from the last one to survive the next. The 1973 oil crisis was more than a moment of economic turmoil. It was a turning point, a reminder that power is not fixed, and wealth can shift overnight when a single resource becomes the world's lifeline. From gold to oil, from territory to energy, every era has its empire. And the lesson remains the same: dependence is vulnerability. First, the crisis showed how quickly global systems can unravel when a strategic resource is weaponized. Second, it proved that control over energy is control over destiny. And third, it revealed that adaptation, though painful, can give birth to entirely new economic orders. Today, as the world races toward new energy frontiers, those same dynamics are in play once again. Whoever controls tomorrow's energy will write tomorrow's rules. History doesn't belong to the strongest, but to those who understand the shifts before they happen. If you found this story revealing, imagine what you'll discover in the next chapter. Subscribe to Financial Chronicle and join us as we uncover the hidden forces that shape global power, wealth, and the future. Because understanding history isn't about looking back. It's about seeing what's coming.